Hello, so our guests today are from the newly formed New Zealand Automotive Investments, or what I guess some people would know more commonly, although it is only part of the structure, as 2Cheap Cars. We have the new chairman, Carl Smith, with us here. Carl has an extensive background as a professional director and in various businesses, particularly in the logistics area, including time on the board of Ports of Auckland. And we also have new Chief Executive Officer, David Page. And David comes from the banking and finance side of the industry. So thanks for joining us, Carl and David.
Morning, yes. Thank you very much for having us.
So it's been a bit of an interesting week for you guys, I imagine, and we'll cut straight to, I guess, the big news. A week ago today, this is Thursday, 2Cheap, New Zealand Automotive Investments, so I've got to try and keep getting the name correct, listed on the New Zealand Stock Exchange. Can you tell us how that went? I mean, first off, you were happy with the performance of the listing?
Yeah, well, I think maybe I'll go first, David. This is what's called a direct listing on the NZX. So it's not an IPO, it's not raising any capital, but what it's doing is it's a smoother way for businesses, emerging businesses like our own, to get profile, to get our story out there, to really get a good understanding. And I guess to get to this level, there's been a hell of a lot of work going on in the last 8 to 12 months. When you do the due diligence and you meet the NZX regulations, it's stringent because, as you would have seen, a couple of days after the listing, we put our earnings announcement out there, and really that's it's highly restricted. You have inside information. You've got blackout periods. You can trade or not trade. So hey, most importantly, we achieved that after a hell of a lot of grunt and a lot of effort. And we're pleased to have made that first hurdle, but the hard work's now in front of us.
The trading so far, from what we've seen, has been pretty muted. I mean, was that to be expected, or is that just down to the lockdown, or any thoughts around that?
Well, the idea is that the two founders will have an opportunity. They can or cannot sell if they want to sell down some of their shares under some escrow arrangements. And the idea is that we want to build liquidity in the shares, and because we're not issuing new shares, the two founders will do some sell down. We have some wholesale and non-affiliated investors, which we brought on board in November of 2020 anyway, which gave us the initial spread. And you need to meet certain regulations and requirements by the NZX to actually take the next step. So, yeah, it's muted. The earnings announcement was critical just to get that out there. And, we're heading towards the close of our financial year pretty soon. It's not unexpected. And I think COVID and the fourth lockdown, fourth for Auckland anyway, certainly didn't help probably. But, we then put the earnings guidance, we balanced that up against what the lockdown would look like.
So what was the road to get here? I mean, how long has this been in the works?
This, I think, has been mooted, certainly prior to David and I arriving, probably be talked about by the advisors that Eugene Williams and David Senna surrounded themselves with in 2019. And I think they really got more seriously into it in the early part of 2020, talking about what the options were. I think the critical thing for us, though, is that both of those founders are wanting to retain cornerstone shareholdings in this business. They're still younger guys, they've still got opportunities, they've still got some innovation and entrepreneurship. So, it's been on the go for a while, but probably more intensively since about the middle of 2020.
Right. And David, when did you join the pack, and how long have you been working with 2Cheap Cars now? Oh, sorry, I've got to stop that, with NZ Automotive Investments.
That's right. So I joined in December last year. So I've only been on board for a few months, but I've been having ongoing conversations with the team at 2Cheap for over a year now. Initially met Eugene through a connection through the ASB, probably about 12 months ago, and had ongoing conversations about me potentially coming on board in some shape or form. So really excited to come on board as the CEO at the end of last year in December.
And what do you think you bring to the car industry? What do you think you bring to motor vehicle dealing? You've got a banking background. How much that's transferable?
A considerable amount is transferable, but I also have a background in sort of a family history in and around the motor trade, which you might not be familiar with. So my father, my grandfather have all spent their entire lives working in and around the motor trade. So my grandfather had his own service station. He was a mechanic. He worked as a mechanic for the Air Force. My father spent his entire career as an engine reconditioner. Growing up in and around the motor trade, I was lucky enough to have a lot of roles on a part-time basis, but also be sort of entrenched in it. So having sort of left university, I got into the automotive finance side, worked with AGC Finance, also worked with Marek Finance, and then ultimately set up ASB Asset Finance. So a lot of compatible skills there. Also, probably one other key attribute in my sort of career was around working for ASP and running their branch network. So we had 120 branches spaced throughout the country, 1,300 employees. So the skills around that sort of large operational management, I think, are quite transferable. If you couple in the sort of the finance opportunity that sits in front of our NZAI business through our New Zealand Motor Finance team, that's quite considerable. And then also we've got a lot of the skills that I bring around governance, management, efficiencies, culture. So yeah, so quite an exciting opportunity for me, and also the skills that I bring towards the group.
Now, I mean, what kind of work was required on 2Cheap Cars, New Zealand Automotive Investments team at this point? And I'm going to say 2Cheap Cars in this state because we are talking about what was needed to get the company to a point where it could be listed. Now, Eugene has made no secret over the years about the fact that he wanted to list the company. I think he announced it back in 2015, 2016. But it always seems to be pushed to the back burner, and there's been some controversies through the years, particularly around staffing, and there's been some changes in management over the time. Hey, what did you guys need to do to get this place in a position where it was of a quality where it could list?
Oh, well, I think most importantly, Richard, is that, yep, they had some trip ups when they were going pretty fast and furious. I mean, this place has been going for 10 years. So they've grown a business from nothing to quite a substantial number today. And so I think in the trip up process, which was the ComCom issues around and breaches of the Fair Trading Act and MB around some employment payment issues, they really then got under, they really sort of stepped back, got themselves surrounded by decent advisors, legal, human resources, and then through their work with Northington Partners, then took the next step to say, okay, well, if we get our policies, training, get ourselves in better shape operationally, procedurally in the back office, and apply the rigor that was required, because let's face it, probably what the rigor wasn't there. Then through Northington, that's how I got on board, was being tapped on the shoulder, given my own current portfolio of directorships. We then started to think about how we would build out the independence and the rigor of the governance level, and then of course looking at the management level. And I think Eugene and David realised that their entrepreneurship needed to be complemented by some of us that have been around the block a few more times.
So I mean, who is in control these days? I mean, are David and Eugene still playing a fairly strong leading role in the company, or are they now taking a back seat to you, David, and Carl as chairman?
Maybe I'll go first. I think first and foremost, as the chairman of the board, I lead that board. I interface with our stakeholders, our investors, and in reality, it's Eugene and David Senna sticking to their knitting in terms of Eugene in terms of his marketing capabilities, and in David Senna's case, the procurement pathway through Japan into New Zealand. They will play executive director roles, and David, they report to David Page as the CEO. So that's a big step for founders. You don't just hand over the reins. But I think that's the learnings that they've had over the last couple of years, Richard, that they've actually realised that if they really want to capitalise and we want to grow the business, they need to surround themselves with good advisors and good rigour and governance. And I think that's a fantastic recognition. It's something that I'm very familiar with in family-led and founder-led companies that I've worked with. It's a very common trait But it takes a big recognition that you don't have all the skill sets. These two gentlemen figured it out, got themselves surrounded by the right sort of people, and now we could not take this company onto the stock exchange without that level of competence and capability.
I mean, David, you on a day-to-day basis, how often are you seeing Eugene and David?
Well, before the lockdown, in person every day, so working really closely together. They've got a lot of skills and expertise, as Carl's touched on, in and around the business. So I'm working with them closely. Eugene is very much running the sales and marketing side independently, as Carl says, and David very much the procurement side. So they are very much key in the business and want to retain their roles within that business and looking after those areas of expertise. My focus has been up until now the listing primarily and getting everything lined up for the listing. I'm now moving my focus more into some of the operational excellence things we can do to gain efficiencies and sort of continue to leverage the value of our wider supply chain. But yeah, David and Eugene very much hands-on, still integrated into the business.
It certainly seems from my experience with 2Cheap and looking at it with previous management there, is that you kind of seem to have all these great pieces in place like that big centre of Mount Wellington and so forth, but the functioning hasn't always necessarily been dialed in to the level that it should. Is that kind of your key part now, is making all these components work?
Yeah, I think that's right, but I also think it's a challenging industry. There's a lot of component parts to it, as you've touched on. So making those work in unison through things like COVID and other challenges we've had, I think that's the opportunity for us to get better and better at that. There is some efficiencies, there is some digitisation we can do, etc., that can not only create efficiencies and grow our bottom line, but also de-risk the business in some of the areas that we've had in the past. So yeah, it's an exciting challenge.
Mm-hmm. Now, in one of the releases around the listing, there was discussion that you guys want to, I guess, be the next Turners. I mean, what does that mean? What is the future for New Zealand Automotive Investments and 2Cheap Cars? Will we see you guys buying into other dealerships? Will we potentially see entering the new vehicle industry? What are the plans?
Well, I don't think we use the term as us being the new Turners. I think we've got a point of difference that we're trying to achieve on our own bat there, Richard. So I think the real we've got opportunities to grow our finance company. There's no question about that. That's primarily a big opportunity that we have not been able to capitalise upon. I think that's true. I think we always use the term, we'll never say never to growth via acquisition. But for us, I think we've got some ideas, which we'll keep to ourselves, about wanting to grow our penetration in various categories in New Zealand. We won't be going into the new car market. That's for sure. That's not our game at all. I think we've got a reasonably record of procurement and integration from Japan through into New Zealand. I think there's, as David pointed out, I think they've got some opportunities there to actually leverage that, make that more efficient, get our digitisation a lot better, and continue looking at our target market. We don't lose sight of our customers and those people that are more in a need to have rather than a want to have situation.
So the key is more around growing the 2Cheap business rather than necessarily expanding outside that space.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, there might be, as we do, it's a very fragmented dealership world in New Zealand, for second-hand car dealers, 3,094 of them, 1- and 2-man bands, and you name it. So, I think our strength is that we are end-to-end. We're in control of our dealerships, and we're in connection with what are the requirements of the vehicles that are required for New Zealand. And clearly, the government's laid out a pathway for lower emissions. We think we're in a really good position to be able to capitalise upon that.
You guys see that as an opportunity rather than a challenge?
Huge opportunity. I think there's no question. I think we're already bringing in reasonable numbers of EVs and HEVs. And if you look at the Japanese regulations in 2014, their lower emissions regulations are already, that wave of cars is probably always starting to come on shape in terms of being nearly compliant with the 2025 rules here in New Zealand. So I think the HEV, EV debate is all about price point, and we're going to need governmental support for that.
Yeah, also I'll just add to that, Carl, it's about the consumers understanding it as well. So there's a piece of education to go out into the market for consumers, what buying and owning an electric or a hybrid electric vehicle is. And I think that's another opportunity for the whole market, really, because certainly the industry probably listening to this call will understand that, but there's a lot of consumers out there that perhaps don't understand the ins and outs of owning an HEV or an EV. So there's a piece of work to be done there, and I think then we'll see different levels of adoption over time, which we're well positioned to be involved with.
In regards to finance, I mean, you've mentioned a couple of times now that one of the opportunities is to make the most of that New Zealand motor finance operation you've got there. Does that mean we could see your partnership with your current financier, Finance Now, I think they're generally your main one, come to an end and switch to 100% in-house finance on 2Cheap Cars vehicles?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. I suppose from my perspective, it's not about that coming to an end. There's certainly growth opportunities in front of the 2Cheap business. So what we want to do is try and grow that and also grow the finance partnerships that we have. So I think over time, it's natural that we'll write more and more finance through New Zealand Motor Finance, but certainly our relationship with Finance Now is a key relationship that we're looking to enhance. I've had good conversations with them around that. So it's not about that coming to an end. It's about us working with them and working with New Zealand Motor Finance. They offer slightly different solutions for customers at the moment, so they sort of serve slightly different parts of the market. So there's always going to be an opportunity for them to work alongside each other.
Could New Zealand Motor Finance go to market and offer finance through other channels?
In terms of other asset classes, or
as in could other dealers write business through New Zealand Motor Finance in the future? Is that something that's on the box?
It's something that's possible, but it's not something we're looking at right at the moment. So it's certainly possible. The finance business is set up independently that it can operate that way, but it's not something that we're investigating right at this point in time. But yeah, as Carl said, over the horizon, there's lots of opportunities in front of us.
Now, one other thing that's happened quite significant over the last few years in the import trade has been vertical integration. You've seen a lot of companies, both from the New Zealand and Japan side, merge, join together, acquire, so that they can offer a kind of end-to-end solution to dealers, or in some cases right down to a retail level. I mean, do you guys see yourself expanding your components that you currently have within that supply chain model? And were there any concerns when you did go to market to list this that potentially you could become an acquisition target for one of the larger vertically integrated Japanese import supply chain companies?
Yeah, I think there's whenever you become a listed company, and if you've got enough spread of shares, someone might see a really good opportunity. That's definitely a possibility. Bear in mind that the two founder shareholders are also always going to have a reasonably significant stake in this business. It's possible, and if by chance someone did come over the horizon with a large checkbook, they would only do that if they saw significant strategic advantage to do that. Never, it's the same old story, Richard. Never say never. That is a possibility for someone to get bigger and better. New Zealand is obviously an attractive market. We have some of the highest, per capita motor vehicle ownership in the world. That's not going to disappear anytime soon. So I think for us, we're going to do a bloody good job building and helping grow the existing automotive retail and the automotive finance side of the business. And if that, for some reason, becomes very attractive to people, so the market will be the market. But it's not a priority for us. We're not building it to sell it. We're building to grow this business into something more competitive than what it is today.
Now, last question. I mean, 2Cheap Cars has always kind of had, and I say this in a very positive way, this kind of scrappy street fighter, break the conventions kind of approach to the vehicle market in so many ways from how they do business. Is that something that can be maintained as a listed company when you've got a whole new set of rules to deal with, a whole new management structure to deal with? Can you keep that spirit and that ability to grow and fight like that?
I think that's why Eugene Williams and David Senna are staying on and are going to be contributing. We are going to put them into the helicopter more now rather than be down in the depths of the business, because they've got some over the horizon thinking that we want to capitalize upon. And I think that's, there's governance, there's some rules, but equally the entrepreneurial spirit is the critical thing here. And we can't take our eye off what our customers and our price points are. We want to get better at it. We're not bad at it, but we want to get a lot better at it.
David, I guess you're the ultimate guardian of that kind of spirit.
Absolutely, and I suppose I'd frame it in a slightly different way. I've been involved in challenger brand businesses before, and I think that sort of entrepreneur challenger sort of mentality exists within the company. And I think it's about how we channel that through the culture to ensure that we keep that, but also meet all the regulations and requirements as a listed company. So I think certainly the initial signs for me is that that's 100% possible. And we're starting to do that with some of the new rigor we've put around some of our internal processes. For me, really, it's about the culture of the organisation, retaining all of those strengths that you've touched on around that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, that challenger brand and attitude, and pushing that forward into the future, looking at those opportunities.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. That's new NZ Automotive Investments Chairman Carl Smith and NZ Automotive Investments Chief Executive David Page.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.